Great. So yeah, Han works in breaking news. I work more in long form publication, but I think there's so much overlap. I could already feel like some connections, some vibes going on between what you heard from her and what you'll hear from me. So I'm very excited about that. So my talk is about unique data-driven designs at Condé Nast. My name's Lily. I'm a designer and developer. If you're unfamiliar, Condé Nast is a magazine publishing company. We publish all of these magazines, tons of different titles that you may be familiar with, and my team works across all of these brands. One of my favorite things about data visualization in terms of just the field and the people working in it and the stuff that we do is that everyone has sort of a weird winding path that brought them there. And I just love hearing about everyone's. So this is mine. I started as a geography major, doing a little bit of mapping, but mostly a lot of like human research, a lot of like sustainability work. So I started as a research writer at a nonprofit, and in that work realized how much importance there was on the visuals of that. We were publishing a bunch of like long PDFs for legislators and for cabinet members, and just like really not getting the point across with like 20 pages of text. So I spent a lot of time sort of teaching myself, going to workshops, figuring out the best way to visualize the types of stuff we were writing about. Some of my favorites were from Edward Tufte, the grandfather of the field himself. Information is Beautiful. Alberto Cairo does some really great online workshops. And at that point, I was able to switch that title on my business card and call myself a data viz professional, going to some different conferences, meeting people, meeting my now manager at a conference, which was a great connection to get started at Condé Nast. And we worked on a bunch of internal analytics and dashboards, and also some editorial pieces. And as we continued working more and more with the editorial team, we shifted our team's focus into what we are now called Data Story Lab. So Data Story Lab is a team within Condé Nast. We sort of work as an in-house agency across all brands, working on highly customized, engaging, interactive features. So anything that can be visualized, interacted with, things that are outside of the bounds of a normal article that you might see on a magazine's website is what we do. So I'm going to walk through some of the projects that we've done, what makes them different, show you some of the thought processes behind them, and then I'll go into some sort of general takeaways about our process and how we bring these things to life. So one of our very first pieces was a recipe explorer, recipe finder. I was very interested in not only looking for a single ingredient or a single type of recipe, but understanding how ingredients are connected to one another. So in this grid of ingredients at the top, the illustrations, as you start clicking them and filtering them, you can see what other things are still connected based on the recipes in the database. So as you click around, you can sort of like build up your own recipe and figure out what it is maybe you have on hand. In this scenario, maybe, I want something with gin. I see that, aperitifs, I have one that I've been meaning to drink. So let's see what kind of recipes are available for those. Lots of Negroni types. Those are my favorites. We worked with Vogue, who had a problem with their street style photography in that there are just so many of them. Anyone familiar with Vogue and fashion shows knows that they are at every single one. They take street style photos of every fashion show all around the world, all year long, which is so many photographs that all exist in separate gallery pages. So if you want to go find, Paris 2020 and see what people were wearing then, it's really hard to go back through the website and find that in the different gallery pages. So we connected all of those into a single filterable page, but then also added a little element to sort of give you an idea of what trends we're doing. So here, searching for motorcycle jacket, you could see really quickly that Paris is the most common city to find a motorcycle jacket. I mean, that's, obvious, they're so stylish, but you could also see, lots of black, lots of blue and white and red are some other colors that people typically pair with motorcycle jackets. And you can get really detailed with this, looking at the city, looking at multiple items, looking at fashion styles, etc. Another fashion data viz, but this time to make it a little bit more personal. This is a piece working with some commerce articles. So Glamour is really well known for having really great curated articles about like things to buy for certain occasions. So for summer weddings, instead of just creating a very long list of, all of the different types of outfit pieces, we put it together into a little curated mood board. So you can have, different types of weddings at the top, like what sort of style you're going for, and then pick your favorites out of what the editors have selected and create a little personalized mood board here. We also do a lot of sort of list visualization. So this is an annual list done by Architectural Digest called the AD 100. This is a huge piece for them. They put a lot of effort into this every year, and they wanted to make sure that it was a fun user experience and something that people could come back to and really use as a resource and make, more accessible than just a solid list. So adding a little bit of visual flair to this, we created these symbols for different, types of parameters for each one of these designers. So whether they're architects or landscape designers or interior designers, whether it's their first time on the list or whether it's a female-owned studio, makes a little unique visual badge for each entrant on the list. So it sort of like calls out their unique personality, makes the list also very scannable and easily filterable. This is a recipe finder that we created also for Epicurious, but instead of leading with ingredients, this is led with regions. So this is part of a larger piece that came out a couple months ago around Chinese recipes and different regions, histories with different flavors, cultural and cuisine history for different regions and how everything is so different throughout the mainland. So this gives you sort of a discovery of different regions. As you hover over, you can see the types of dishes you might find in those places and link out to their recipes. We also built a cocktail ABV calculator, which is super fun. So this was, could have just been like a very simple form, and a lot of these do exist on the internet, and they are not super pleasant. In doing some research around what already existed for this, they're very wonky, very mathy. You have to know a lot about the ABV of what you already have, how those things are connected. But with this, we wanted to create sort of a seamless flow. So we put some cocktails in the database already that Epicurious created the formulas for. So if you want to find just what's in a Negroni, it will auto-populate for you, but you can also add your own things. Also adding just a little bit of delight by making these buttons shake when you hover them. So if you have a shaken drink, the button will shake. If you have a stirred drink, the button will stir around. And then as you get to your final drink, you get a little visualization of what it looks like, the proportions. And as a fun little Easter egg, as you hover over it, you can sort of mix up your drink. We created a reviews explorer for Pitchfork. This is also sort of they had a similar problem as Vogue in that they have a ton of backlog content, a ton of really great content that, editors have spent a lot of time writing, and it just sort of gets buried from all of the years of content that there is. So Pitchfork has been writing reviews since 1999, and there are over 30,000 of them on the website. So we were presented with the problem of how do we make that a fun experience to surface these old reviews, find something new, spend some time in the backlog of what Pitchfork has, and sort of facilitate that like rabbit hole experience. When you find something you like, you want to find something else that's similar to that and just keep going. So there's a lot of data in this, in that we've got, the review itself. Pitchfork is known for rating albums, so these number ratings are well known / well hated across the internet. They're a very high topic of debate, and so surfacing those as sort of how these things are connected and a way to plot them on the scale here, to see what's highly rated, what's lowly rated, also being able to see that by date. So this takes in a single artist that you start with, and then we connect that to the Spotify API to get a list of 20 similar artists. And then we connect that to all of the albums that have been reviewed by Pitchfork of those 20 similar artists, so that you can sort of get this chart of things that you probably will enjoy, and then you can explore it and go from there. And one of our most recent pieces is a really fun one, also for Epicurious, plotting different types of cakes. So this is from the mind of Genevieve Yem, who is a really great pastry chef, and she'd been doing a lot of work on the history of cakes and just all of the different regional varieties across the world, what types of different cakes there are, where they came from, and wanted to be able to make that easily accessible and fun to discover. So this was, we created a matrix based on how quick it makes to cook it and how fluffy or dense the cake is. So angel food to cheesecake, or a quick little vanilla cake to a multi-day chocolate extravaganza. So you can quickly just sort of see what types of cakes are available here, see their photos, and then you can read more and jump down to those little write-ups that have more information about their histories and where they came from. So all these really are fun and cool, and it's great to see final products, but also it's more interesting to know how they came to life. And there are definitely hours and hours and hours that I could spend walking through how all of these were created and the processes behind them. But what I'm going to do instead is just sort of take you through sort of our step-by-step overall principles. So this isn't necessarily a guide for these things, but this is sort of like a reframing of how to ask yourself questions and how to challenge your designs through these different phases, to come up with something maybe a little bit more unique or a little bit different than expected, to create that like surprise and delight factor. So for data, this is both data and just idea generation. Where do you get the data? Where do you figure out what to focus on? First, the concept. In all of these, there are things that we're curious about, right? Like there are things that make us excited. There are things that we want to know more about. And there are things that we think others might feel the same way. So questions you could ask to get to some of these topics are just, what are you curious about? What's the world talking about? I mean, current events that's like rife with information, as we just saw from Han. What are your friends talking about? There's also a lot of power in, just what people around you are getting excited about. Maybe that's The Bachelor. Maybe that's video games. Maybe that's, whatever is going on in your friends' lives. What do you think people would be interested in knowing more about, and like diving deeper into that? You can also pull from personal experiences, like what's the latest drama in your life? That could be something really great that happened to you. That could be something kind of scary that happened to you. I'm reminded of a piece that came out about a year ago, maybe, from The Pudding, that one of their editors had a daughter who had a nut allergy, and he went through this whole process of figuring out what he could buy for her, finding out that sesame is in almost everything. I have a friend who has a sesame allergy, and I never quite understood how hard it was for her until I read that article and saw that visualization. So thinking about things that, may be scary to talk about, or you may think is just you, end up being really powerful visualizations that can really connect with people and, bring that reader along for the ride. So using your passions to your advantage and really starting with that like core concept is the best way to start. And really everything is data. But where do you find it? There are some places that are good places to start. Google Trends is a really great one. Kaggle has a lot of really good data sets. Google Dataset Search. But if we're being honest, almost actually all of these were custom data sets that we created ourselves or had our editors that we were working with create. So a lot of these more personal pieces will have some time on the front end creating that data, but that's okay. That's what makes it unique, and it's worth the time. Brainstorming is probably my favorite phase, and this is just the best. And I think that people should spend so much more time in this phase when possible. So thinking about how people are going to see this for the first time, how they're going to interact with it, what do you want your reader to discover? What is that core thing that you want to like bring delight to? So thinking about like the two recipe finders that I showed you, one based on cocktail ingredients and one based on regions in China. They both had different goals of what we wanted the reader to discover. One is just like thinking about what you have on your bar cart. How do you start with that mentality of like, okay, pick a couple ingredients, see what we can find? Or is it really more about the history and the culture of different regions? Is it about, surfacing those differences in a place that maybe to the Western world feels like one big place, but when you break it down, you've got so many different options. What is it about this information that excites you? That's going to be really the core of what you want to display to your reader. And how do you want to experience this set of data? So I always think about, what would this look like if I put it into a list, if I turned this into a story, if I put this on a map, if I created, a filterable something, thinking about all the different formats that may be the right way to tell this. You kind of have to try them all first to see. Also, can you add an unexpected element or connection? So any one of these things could be a very simple, straightforward piece, but we always try to ask this question during the brainstorm phase of like, what other pieces of data do we have, or what other like axes can we add to this? What other types of ways can we turn this into a more dimensional product? So for this one, again, instead of just looking at one recipe or one type of recipe, how do you filter, but then also show more of a connection as you're filtering? So this shows you when you have these two things selected, what else still exists? There are 7 recipes and they have these different ingredients left. That adds just that second layer of intrigue of, I want to explore this thing and see what I can get out of it. And a little bit more fun. I always also, for the visualization side of things, like to use a quick data viz tool. I use RawGraphs a lot. This is just a free browser-based tool that you can use their data, you can copy and paste your own data, and it just really quickly mocks up a very large variety of different charts. And I like to go through and just try a bunch of them and see what works. You can also do this in Flourish, which is a great tool. They have a free tier where you can just play with some of these options and templates. And that usually brings up a lot of questions and a lot of ideas of like, how are these things related? What are different axes or comparisons that I can make between them? Really just like asking all of those questions and running through all of those iterations before landing on anything. And then the design. So you've kind of thought through what the format might look like. You thought you've got maybe a visualization in mind that you want to use. So how are you going to pull this into a larger piece? First, the most important thing is that you're designing both the visualization and you're designing the UI and UX for the entire experience. So the visualization itself is important, but so is that UI UX and how a user gets to this piece, how they interact with it while you're there, how they exit it, what they will see on different screen sizes. These are all things that cannot be done in a vacuum. So visualization design, very important. UI UX, also very important. I always start with wireframes and using constraints to your advantage. So we've really started mobile first designs on our team because small spaces really force you to think about that core of the experience. When you're forced to design an interactive feature on a small mobile screen, you really get to the heart of what you're trying to do, where, how you'll navigate through the page, and, what that reader experience will be. Designing first in black and white because you don't want to get distracted by color at this phase. Focusing on more the hierarchy of the page, the user flow, the interactions is more important than, dressing up that design. And avoiding lorem ipsum at this phase. I know it's like very easy to just drop in fake text or just like a text box and just call it good. But over and over again, we've learned this just creates more design problems in the future. Knowing that maybe different titles based on your data might be a lot longer, knowing that, maybe you have to design a box that will be the right size for 3 lines of text versus just 1 line of text. What happens when things get longer, when they get shorter, when your data is not exactly what you think your lorem ipsum is. So as much of the actual data that you can include in the wireframe is going to help you in the long run. I think most importantly is following established and expected patterns and then using maybe design, like unique design patterns on top of those, but always following the established patterns for user experience so that people don't get confused, so that it feels like a cohesive whole and people understand how to use it without having to read both your visualization and try and understand how the page works. So some basics that I have learned and have stuck to are when you're filtering things, filters above the thing you're filtering is like the common intuitive way. People always expect that, filter bar at the top. Giving readers the tools they need to navigate. This could be anything from going from page to page or knowing when they need to scroll or understanding how far they are into an experience, having like a scroll bar indicator, having a next button, or if you have a form, having the right labels or input text on that form is all small things that can easily be overlooked, but those are the real things that create this larger interactive experience to be a success. And Gestalt principles, I'm not going to go through them right now, but they are a standard for a reason. These are things like proximity, white space, continuity. I highly suggest just Googling that and reading about Gestalt principles if you're not familiar, because they are the basis of how we understand the information presented to us as humans. Also, user testing. Seems like there's never enough time for this. It's always like a nice to have, but even just showing something to a coworker or a friend. Han was talking about this earlier about just like getting someone else's opinion. Everyone has a different experience, a different outlook of how they see things. So being able to just show your designs to someone sitting next to you or a teammate or your husband or wife at home, like just let them know, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Does it work? And I find that after looking at my designs for so long and working on these pieces, I completely miss those basics because I know it so well that I just assume that everyone else will. So one example is for the Pitchfork Review Explorer. I was so excited to have all of these filters, to have all of this information. We had, different genres, we had the ratings, we had whether or not the albums were the best new music albums as designated by Pitchfork. We had dates and ratings, we had colors, we had sizes. I was like, oh, this is so cool. You can just filter every single thing and get all of, any kind of information you could want. But then as people started looking at this and trying to understand how it worked, you realize that like those different sizes were only showing in the legend under rating, and it was hard to understand why they had different sizes. People also, this was like a little bit too tall for mobile phones, so they had to scroll down to get to the filter at the bottom. So they didn't even know that they could filter it at first. And then having just so many things to look through just really threw people off. And like every time you filtered the color, all the colors would change and you have to kind of relearn what the visualization means. So through all of that and just like showing that to different users, came up with a much more simple piece that I think is so much more successful, but really would not have come from just me designing this on my own. Came from lots of cooks in the kitchen and figuring out like how to best optimize this. So we have the filters at the top, just 2 buttons. You can just filter the axis one way or the other. And then keeping all those circles the same size. So there's just one legend, one thing to figure out one time. And then as you filter, you understand what's going on. And then developing. So we're very lucky on Data Story Lab to have some great engineers, and we do pretty much everything in custom code. So we work in React for most everything. We also enjoy using D3 like Han introduced, but mostly not just for charting. It's also great for certain functions like scaling, for mathematical functions, for positioning, that sort of thing. It's great to sort of take apart into pieces and use as needed. We use different JavaScript library integrations like GSAP. We use a few different scrolling options. Also, I don't think that we've used the one that Han introduced, but I know we use Intersection Observer, which is also a very good one. We also use content APIs for a lot of our internal work. So like the Reviews Explorer or the Street Style Trend Tracker are coming from internal APIs. So yeah, custom code for basically everything. And finally, these are just sort of my big takeaways that I think are the most important. Asking unique questions to get unique data and designs. Everything is data. Literally anything in your life you can turn into something cool. Spend as much time possible brainstorming, playing, and iterating. That's where you get the best ideas. After you've had an idea, play with it and you'll get a better one. Your passions and your curiosity are your greatest advantage. Thank you.
That was super interesting, and I got both thirsty and hungry.
That's the point.
Is that the point? Okay. Is that what happens to you when you work on your different brands? You know, if you work on the fashion brand, you want to go shopping, and if you work on food, then you get hungry. Is that your daily life, Lily?
I mean, that is a hazard of the job. I get very distracted in making these things and end up, doing some shopping, some eating, some music listening, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, there's so much stuff for me which is extremely recognizable, even though I'm definitely not a data visualization person. But I think the one thing which was kind of eye-opening for me is where you start with something, you've made something because you think it works, you made kind of a few different options, and then you start testing it, and you're saying, you might as well test it on just one person or anything, and then you find out, this is really how people use it, and we should always make it simpler. But simple is always better, but it's always also the most difficult thing to do. So how I mean, is this the example that you use? Is that very typical, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, it is pretty typical. I think as designers, developers, as people who work with data, and as curious, passionate people, we're excited about the things that we're designing and that we're bringing into the world. So we want to put in as much as possible and to just be like, wait, no, this part's interesting. This part's interesting. Oh, what if somebody wants to know about this part? Because I mean, that's our human side of things, right? We just get so excited about it. But taking that step back and like I said in one of those slides of just using constraints to your advantage, starting really intentionally on, mobile, doing wireframes, doing things that really like start with that user flow and understanding how someone is going to interact with something before you dive into all of the stuff is a great way to start to avoid that. I don't think it's ever fully avoidable because we just get so excited about the things that we do. So also just making sure other people see it and gut checking and having people that have no experience with the data taking a little poke at it and letting you know how they experience it for the first time is invaluable.
Yeah, I understand. And because you work with so many different brands, right? So that for you, that means not only, I mean, for a lot of stuff that will be just changing kind of like visual style or, brand feel. In this case, it's also because it's digital and there's interaction. So it also means might be quite a change in people's routes and user journeys, right?
Yeah, sometimes for sure. I guess it depends on the format of what we're creating. So we've done different things like we've done a fair amount of things like, put some input in, get something out, like the Reviews Explorer or the ABV calculator, that sort of thing, where that's sort of like a pattern that we've used. We've also done, more like a quiz or like a filtering experience. And those all, I wouldn't say they differ by brand, but it's just more by like UX pattern, like UX flow, and just making sure that we have each one of those in the most like intuitive and user-friendly way is how we approach that.
Yeah. A question that we didn't really get to ask to Han, at least we didn't really manage to go deep into it. How does your team? Well, actually, two questions. One is how big is your team? Because it seems like there's a lot of stuff happening. And B is how does your team think about or incorporate accessibility in the design and development of your work?
Yeah, our team is 6 people. We have designers and developers, and we kind of all sort of wear all of the hats and step in for different projects as needed. But we incorporate accessibility. Oh yeah, we have been thinking about this a lot more in the last year or so, making sure that all of our projects are accessible for different disabilities. We're really trying to sort of make sure that everything we publish at least hits the level A standard. So we sort of go through that checklist of, is there keyboard accessibility? How does this look for a screen reader? That's something that we are now, incorporating into our formal process. That's something that is necessary both in the beginning, like brainstorming and wireframing process, but also in that development process, making sure that like we're not using as many divs as maybe we used to, trying to make sure everything has like an actual tag that makes sense to somebody who is not visually seeing what's on the page. So those sorts of things, just making sure we at least hit that level A and then going beyond if we can, is something that we're incorporating.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So it's and if you have to give a percentage of how far are you there in terms of accessibility, you're nearing 100%, or are you still a way to go?
Great question. I think, well, in our more recent pieces, we are definitely nearing 100% for that like level A baseline. That's something that we, are really prioritizing. But going forward, I don't know, lower percentage for higher levels.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. Kind of last question from my side. If you're drinking Negroni on a party, you're a little happy, and somebody asks you the question, what are you? Are you a journalist? Are you a developer? Or are you a designer? Which one do you pick?
I always go with the like designer / developer, or developer / designer, like just all one word. It's not different things. It's just like one thing together. I think they both all of these things inform the other. So I'm a better designer because I've learned to code. I'm a better developer because I've learned design. They inform the process so hand in hand that it's really hard to like distinguish those within myself. It just really, it helps both processes to have at least a little bit of knowledge of each side of that.
Good. Well, now you can also add, Smashing Speaker to your list of job titles. So that's amazing. Anyway, thanks very much for your talk. I know you're going to hang out a little bit while we do the challenge, and you can help us judge that in a bit. So maybe before we start with the challenge, a little bit of round of applause with maybe a cocktail in the chat for Lily people. And most of all, thank you for sticking with us, for coming, and we hope to see you soon again, whether it is at a conference or another meets or Smashing Hour. For now, we want to wish you an amazing rest of the day, rest of the week,
rest
of the night for those like us, and we hope to see you again soon. All right,
bye.
Bye.